if you're chasing something for too long, you can get to a point where you do miss out on those opportunities and experiences that maybe you only could have at certain ages.
That sentiment is rife inside the founder community. So much of life is about the grind and delaying gratification for that big payoff that you're waiting for. And when that payoff came for Jace Mattinson, he found himself caught up in a different kind of grind, one to make up for lost time.
In my mind, I had already delayed the gratification for some of those things by 5 and 10 and 15 years. And the time to do some of that stuff was then.
But why is it that us entrepreneurs, we can never just take it easy? Jace didn't just take advantage of his new time and money. He went all in.
There was definitely some months where I spent, 30, 40 grand on hobbies.
This is the story of a pendulum and how living the dream a little too much can, well, kind of ruin the dream. We'll also hear why his version of going all in on business wasn't bootstrapping his own company, but was taking a huge gamble on buying a more than century-old business that was cash flow negative. My name's Harry Morton, and this is Moneywise, a podcast not about how to get rich, but about the surprising changes that happen in your life when you do. This is how Jace's life changed, for the better, then for worse-ish, and now for better again. So let's start with the moment that incited all of it. How much was the exit for?
Total enterprise value we sold was over 100.
Okay. And what did you make personally?
Low 7 figures of that.
Low 7 figures. Okay.
Yep. Had some debt to pay off, and I was the smallest shareholder, and yeah.
So what's your net worth today?
North of 5.
Okay. And can you do a portfolio breakdown for me? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I still try to keep my three-legged stool pretty even. So about a third's in real estate, and that's personal residences and investments. About a third that is in, quote unquote retirement accounts or in, marketable securities or publicly traded companies. Honestly, I've been investing in those kinds of things since I was a teenager when I was, doing paper routes and mowing lawns and stuff. So I've held some of those investments for, upwards of 25 years now, which is kind of crazy. And then, the biggest and the lion's share, and also the biggest question mark, is business equity. How much are things really worth? EBITDA and multiples fluctuate drastically. So, on some days, it could be several million, and some days I feel like it maybe be zero. I don't know, A lion's share for sure at this point is definitely in business. But in terms of making any new, investments in business, so to speak, I'm not actively, trying to shift money away from real estate or from, marketable, equities into business. I kind of just continue to use cash flow from business to reinvest in business, so to speak. And same thing on the other side. Generally try to aim for 10 to 20%, liquid, but at different times that scale gets tipped a little bit too, just depending on the time of year and when taxes are due and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, it makes sense. And cash flow, what's cash flow like today then?
Yeah, cash flow is pretty healthy. I mean, I typically, expect 50 to 100, on any given month.
Jace's exit was actually a bit unique compared to most people we have on the show. It wasn't something he started from scratch. In actuality, he started below scratch. He bought a company that was not doing so great.
After college, I graduated. I went into, a traditional path with an accounting degree. I went Big Four. I had a little business that I had started in college doing kind of bookkeeping and some other things for some real estate companies and self-storage and a few things. But as I kind of started to expand that business, it just became apparent that I probably needed to go get, a couple notches behind the belt. Big Four was an easy one to go. After a little bit of that, I just wasn't feeling the corporate life. And that's when I essentially met, one of my first clients after I brought in a bunch of business and kind of made partner with that company and had opened an office. I landed on a client that had been in business for 135 years almost at the time and was struggling financially. And so I did a small leverage buyout on some of the equity there. Naive as I was in my late 20s, thinking that, I could turn things around and didn't have a lot of money to invest, but hey, if I can lever up a little bit, turn this around, maybe I can make a nice profit for myself. Wasn't overnight. The first couple of years were pretty miserable.
So how much debt did you personally take on?
Seller 100,000.
Okay. So again, as a young guy, that's plenty of debt.
Yeah, net worth at the time was probably like 300 grand. And like half that was probably in my house at the time that I ended up selling and getting a little more liquid at the time. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot.
That was a big bet, but it was one he felt comfortable with. And that's because of the way he grew up.
Yeah. So I was the oldest of 4 kids. My parents, kind of came from more or less blue collar households. That kind of played into what it was like for me growing up. We definitely had, the things that we needed in terms of food, shelter, clothing. Grew up in a nice neighborhood. Started having some of those extras with sports and trips and stuff. But it was a nice, middle class upbringing for the most part. I would say.
Yeah, cool. And what do you think you learned from all that?
My dad, even though his risk adverse as he always was trying to figure out investing and kind of bettering life and what to do. And, they spent a lot of time reading books, learning about finances, making a lot of mistakes. And I watched all that as a kid. And he always told me, son, you got to have a business. You got to have a business. Like, my biggest mistake is I just don't know enough about it. Even though I'm medical, I make great income. Like, I just don't know enough about business. And so I grew up with that kind of in the back of my mind. When I was a young kid, I started kind of hustling, mowing lawns, baling hay. I mean, you name it. Growing up in that household, I think it just taught me that, you gotta hustle. You gotta be willing to do some things and get out of your comfort zone. I had a head start, I would say, in that regard, because I realized later that, a lot of my peers weren't graduating with 5 figures, from high school with 5 figures in their bank account.
The classic teenage hustler. Lawn mowing, paper routes, the first of your friends to know what an IRA is. You know the type. You're probably the type. But even with that business-oriented drive, as we learned, Jace still fell temporarily into the corporate world. So what changed? What gave him that final push to take the bet on himself rather than just giving all of that effort to the big corporate? Well, another classic trope. It was a woman.
So I met my wife after college. She grew up in a very different kind of environment. She was youngest of 6 kids, parents very well off. Parents kind of took a different approach as it related to work with her and said, your number one job is to do well in school. And so they don't want you working at all. At the same time though, like she had some, quote unquote, some expensive taste. And at the time I met her in Dallas, Texas, which is home to money and wealth and things that I had never, ever been exposed to in my life. We were dating and there was this incident that happened at one of the shopping centers at a place called Chanel, which at that time in my life I'd never heard of. And as the story was getting told, I made the errant kind of comment and was like, well, who's this Chanel person? Because somebody had backed the truck up and broke the glass and stole purses and stuff, or stole some jewelry. And I was like, why would somebody build their house that close to the road that somebody could back a truck into? But she was frugal in some senses, but just had expensive taste. I kind of credit her in a lot of ways to some of the way that I've thought about things and been willing to approach things, just because when I was that age, I was like, hey, yeah, man, if I kind of get to this point in my life like that, I'll consider to be a success and be able to afford this or that. And marrying her, I kind of had a little bit of a, eye-opening of maybe that's not the tip of my potential. Maybe I need to actually like think bigger and go bigger.
Thus began the biggest change of his life. Talk me through the journey there. Like what was the sort of revenue journey and what did that kind of look like over time?
Yeah, so at the time, the company was about $65 million in revenue. And I know y'all have a lot of tech companies on and tech founders and whatnot. This is like completely opposite. This is brick and mortar, small town America, lumberyards and hardware stores. Company's doing about $65 million in revenue, not real, very profitable, cash flow negative type situation. We got that company up to about $160 million in revenue and about 17-ish million in EBITDA by the time we sold it about 6 years later.
What did that give you the conviction that you could do that? Kind of a kid out of his first job after college, like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. And
because like most young folks, like myself included, like, well, I'm not young anymore, but when I started, it's just to start something from scratch, right? Because you kind of like, you don't have any money. You're figuring it all out, but it's like to jump straight in and be like, cool, $65 million revenue company that's struggling. I'm in, like, I can sort this out.
Yeah, so I kind of took the different approach. I really was drawn to tech. I was really drawn to that startup life. I started in Silicon Valley. When I went out there and I started seeing, one, some of the failure rate, but then two, like, the VC world and just so many of these companies that just burn cash, they don't get to revenue, they don't get the positive cash flow. And granted, I know times have changed a little bit in the tech world, but back when I was there, this is over a decade ago, back in like 2012, 2013, 14, these companies that I was seeing, I had a really hard time like wrapping my head around going and raising VC funding. Company would, all right, you take what, maybe you get some secondary or whatever, but you just end up giving away so much of your business. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have big exits. And granted, a lot of these companies that, are big unicorns now, like Uber and stuff, started around, and was scaling about the time that I was out there. But I just personally, I really struggle. I grew up in kind of more of a blue collar area. And that piece just kind of resonated with me a little bit more of like buying something that was in existence already, that had gone through economic cycles, that I, with my personal skill set, which is not tech. I mean, I'm tech thinking, but I'm not like, hey, let me go program this, or let me even find the right person to program this. It's just not really how my brain works. I figured, hey, let me go look and find some of these companies that are more blue collar, inventory, distribution, things that resonated with me personally that I could wrap my head around. And then the other piece, I'm like, this company survived like all of these economic cycles already. Like I can't fail. Like this, they just need a few tweaks, somebody with a different mindset, a millennial who's going to look at this business differently from a baby boomer who's been doing it for this one way for 60 years. And that's where I saw a lot of opportunity. Was like, I have enough tech background. If I go take some of the things that this business has been doing for all these years, I apply a little tech to it, I think we can get where we need to go and get things turned around. And that was kind of essentially like somewhat of the thesis, if you want to speak in tech terms, of that I thought. Now, at late 20s, yeah, sure. Was I like dumb in some sense of the word? Absolutely. Like I thought I could do it. In hindsight, it was like, man, that was a kind of a crazy risk to take, but luckily it did work out.
Yeah. That's amazing. Do you feel like because I love it, because I'm also from a rural, well, I don't know if I describe your area as rural necessarily. I come from a rural area. And like, there's just a lot less competition here, right? Like, so if you're going to Silicon Valley, you're competing with the Ubers of the world. Like, do you feel like your odds are also greater if you kind of go for this kind of like not so sexy tech world, away from the sex tech world?
I mean, there was a book, and I can't remember what I read, when I read or what it was, but there was a line in it that's always stuck with me. And it talks about that. And the line is basically like, if you play in a market where it's so competitive, you're going to beat your brains out trying to make $1. And on that line, it always stuck with me since, I don't know, I read that in middle school or high school. And so, yeah, I agree. I mean, the rural markets in some places where there's less competition, where maybe, a tech disruption can't come in and completely like eliminate the value of, what revenue stream may exist there. That was definitely a highly, I didn't really understand the rural markets also at the time, even though I kind of grew up in a smaller town. It's not that small, but relatively speaking to some of these cities that have millions of people, it's tiny, right? And that was also something that, I didn't realize, like a town of 5,000 people has some massive profits in it.
So when did you decide you were going to exit?
Honestly, when I bought in, I didn't really have any plans on exiting. That was never kind of the case. It was like, this is just, I think the opportunity is here. And that was 6 years after I'd kind of gotten involved. But that was never the plan from the outset. It wasn't even the plan in year 5. It just kind of, once the stars all aligned and EBITDA had, more than doubled in essentially a year and a half, after some acquisitions and COVID and everything, it was time to start thinking that way a little bit. Yeah,
very cool. And like, how well were you getting paid at that point? So you kind of like, I guess the first year, not a lot. And then like year 2, 3, 4, 5, it ramped up nicely, right? So what did that kind of look like?
Yeah, after that, I mean, at first it was, decent. But towards the end there, I mean, I was getting a nice 6-figure salary, bonuses. We were taking distributions, dividends essentially out of the C Corp as well. So towards the end there, there was some nice, cash flow before even having an exit. in the mid six figures, but it didn't start that way at all. I mean, I can't remember what year one was, but it maybe eclipsed six figures in cash taken home that first year, maybe.
How did your life change overnight after the sale? What was that kind of moment like?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, you get a massive wire in your bank account. And for me, it was the first time ever having that kind of wire in. Life didn't really change that much in the sense that like, okay, I have a little bit more financial stability, a little bit more liquidity now. But what a lot of people don't realize, or at least I didn't realize, and nobody really talked about that I had talked to that had exits, is you start with a whole new set of problems at that point. And the problem is, okay, now you've liquidated your largest asset, at least at that point was for me. And now I've got to, go figure out how to deploy that capital to continue to probably get the return or some sort of return that I was getting, which is not something that you're prepared for or can really do overnight. At least I could. I mean, I've spent so much time trying to get everything ready to sell and negotiating and all that stuff. There was no time to, even in the 9 to 12 month process, to even like think about, hey, what am I going to do with this potential money after the fact. But there's just so many little things that take place along the way from a diligence standpoint and everything else. So that we had some like curveballs even to the 9th or 11th hour and some stuff. And so, yeah, wire happens. Sure, we went and celebrated. My wife and I did. The next thing was like, okay, what does my life look? Because I was staying on for a little bit, with the new owners, private equity backed company.
What did you do with the money like right away? Did you just like put it in a cash account? Like what did you like in the sort of, months to a year after?
I didn't change my investment strategy. I've kind of always held to this three-legged stool of I'm going to have a third essentially in businesses. I'm going to have a third in the markets or equities and, publicly traded companies. I'm going to have a third in real estate. And I didn't change that. And luckily at the time, I had already started investing in some other businesses with some of the cash flow and some franchises and stuff. And so there was an opportunity to spend a little bit more and invest in that, which I did. I did buy a little bit of real estate. I put a little bit in the market, but honestly, I stayed liquid for a long time, probably longer than I would have liked. But at the same time, then cash flow started increasing again from some of these other franchises that I invested in and kind of recreating that problem a little bit of trying to figure out, because the biggest thing, that you don't want to do is lose it all. And sometimes that's really easy to do if something, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, well, I could put something into that, or I could put something into that. And that was something I really was honestly nervous about, of like, I got to make sure that I protect this. I mean, I would say I'm still kind of in the boat of deploying that capital, because it's not back down to zero or back, I think the day before we sold, I probably had like 20 grand in the bank. So, I mean, it wasn't like, not that I probably feel like I need to go back to just having 20 grand in cash, but that was kind of the thought process of like, at some point we'll probably deploy enough of this that we'll get back down to a basic level of cash, but I just haven't got there. So I've kept a lot more, liquid than probably I should have. And part of that's the market too. I mean, COVID, things were going crazy. It's hard to want to do a lot of things. Right. Real estate was going through the roof. Business valuations were going through the roof. And I've never heard, all the people I've been around, never heard anybody ever say like, man, I just have way too much cash. I've just always sat on way too much cash. Like that's a problem. It's more of, man, I wish I always had more liquidity. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind, like, yeah, sure, get inflation, eat it, some of this, absolutely. But it's not going to damage me, too drastically unless I do the same thing for 30 years, which I won't.
So you'd sold, but you did fairly soon afterwards create some more kind of cash flowing stuff. So it wasn't just kind of like your nut and that was it. You were like still working at things. So when did you decide, or when did you go all in on Hobbies then?
We sold like this time of year, like coming into the summer. It was like, all right, I'm ready to go spend some more time at the lake. I'm ready to go travel a little bit. There's some hobbies and some things that I've done that I've sacrificed for the last couple of years and I'm still in my prime in a lot of ways to go do these things. And I don't want to, miss out now that I have or should have a little bit more time and some money in my pocket to go do some of these things. My wife and I are still young. I think at the time we only had 1 or 2 kids and, now we have 5. So there was still some family planning that was going on and trying to figure out like, now that we're here, how can I start to think a little bit differently about other things that I've wanted and, spending more time with the kids? Because there was a time there for those, 4 out of those 6 years where I was gone a lot, working a lot, consumed most of my time and put a lot of stuff on the back burner, honestly. And so, yeah, I started kind of going full board right after that.
What were the biggest, the big blowout things you did that you'd been waiting to do?
Golf membership was up there. I went to, fantasy camp at Duke, which is basketball. And that's, 5 figures out the door to go do that. Granted, there's a little bit of donation piece of that, but I went on some trips, golf trips specifically, and a few other things that, I would say from a hobby standpoint, spending 5 figures to go do something, around one hobby. I just never done that in my life up to that point.
So a few 5-figure trips and stuff. Like, how much do you think you were spending on your hobbies alone at this point in time?
There was definitely some months where I spent, 30, 40 grand on hobbies, right after. Like, I don't even know. I mean, we were spending $10,000+ on going and doing those things and creating those memories. But it was one of those things like, I don't, who knows if I'm going to have this opportunity again at this age, to go do that. So I didn't think twice. My wife, started doing a little bit of that same thing. And we started spending a lot more. And, I bought some new bikes and, went to some camps and some races around that too. And, just didn't blink twice about spending $5,000 to go do a bike race.
Yeah. Amazing. It's interesting though, because you said a minute ago that you were worried about losing it all, right? You just made this good amount. And then you're spending $30,000 a month on basketball and golf. Like, how did you square that? Like, did you have any anxiety around what you were spending at that point? Or you just fuck it, I'm going for it?
No, I mean, the thing that's crazy is you work so hard for some of these things. And I didn't want to lose it on an investment, right? I write a check to whatever. And I never get an experience around that. To me, spending the 20 or 30 grand or whatever it was on 1 month it's I have this experience, I have these pictures forever. So to me, it was not a loss. And also it's a little bit easier to palate, at least for me, spending that 20 grand than making an investment of 250 or 500 or more that potentially could go to zero, or I could not see the return on that for a very long time. Who knows? Is there a little bit more immediate gratification from doing those things with the hobbies? And I realized that, and I kind of went for it. I know some people, in my mind, I had already delayed the gratification for some of those things by 5 and 10 and 15 years. And the time to do some of that stuff was then.
See, I can relate to a lot of this because I'm a bit of a nerd for music gear, right? So I like to make, in my 20s, I spent a lot of my time before I was making any money. I would spend my time making music and putting it up on SoundCloud when that was a cool thing to do, and all that kind of stuff. But having no money to do this stuff, and then I was lusting after it. And then since starting a business, I've got cash flow, I've got some money. I'm now I can finally indulge this stuff, and I can buy all these synthesizers and all this kind of shit. So much fun. But also then I don't actually have the time to go use them. So it's I get excited by these things. I can finally afford these. I can buy, I'm into bikes as well, but mountain bikes for me. I don't know if you're talking about motorbikes or mountain bikes, but.
Mountain bikes, road bikes, yep.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So, I buy these things and it's awesome. And I'm like, oh yes, my 22-year-old self is so stoked at this right now. And then it kind of leans up in the shed and I don't use it so much. So it's cool to see someone actualize this stuff and enjoy it for real. I mean that because it sounds awesome. I'd love to spend all day in my shed playing with my synthesizers and drums that are mostly collecting dust right now. And by the way, I've got better keyboards than this. It's just what was to hand. But since you're a founder, you've probably got the exact same trait as me and the same trait as Jace, and a burning need to just do things. What we've learned from nearly all the founders we've talked to on this show is that doesn't just go away. And if you don't acknowledge it and find a way to be intentional with your time, you can get caught up very quickly. That's why we're able to spend years working away on a business and turn nothing into a real, living, autonomous company. Jace was about to learn that trait also has some downsides. So that we've talked about how much money you were spending. How much time were you spending on this stuff in this period?
Oh, way too much too. That was the problem. It wasn't the money thing. I was spending so much time doing these things that I started to not enjoy them as much. And that was what really kind of was a wake up call of, hey, I can't go do this every day. I can't do this even every other day in some respects.
Like too much time, like how much? Every day. Are we talking like, 8 hours a day fishing or like, what was that?
No, not 8 hours a day fishing, but I would go ride my bike 3 to 4 times a week for 2 to 4 hours, 5 hours a time. So I'm spending 15 to 20 hours a week on a bike. I'm playing basketball 3-4 times a week, probably 2 hours a pop. So I'm spending 10 hours plus a week playing basketball. I'm going playing golf 3-4 times a week. Same thing, 3-4 hours a pop. So most of my time was doing hobbies. Mm-hmm. And as much as days were fun, it almost became like a job. And then I started after like 4 or 5 months of that, I'm like, man, I really don't want to go play basketball anymore. And I really don't have a love for golf that I once did. Like, this is not great. And so then I really had to start thinking through, like, what is the ideal time to spend? Some of these things don't really actually cost a lot of money after the fact. I mean, they fantasy camp, sure, but I can go play basketball for pretty inexpensively on a day-to-day basis. I can go ride my bikes that I already spent a lot of money on, but going outside, it's not like I gotta, cha-ching and pay every single time I go.
How did your wife react to that phase? Like, what was her view of it all?
Yeah, that's a good question. We still talk about it today. So it could be a sore subject sometimes where, she was a little resentful of some of that time period and, trying to be supportive and, realizing, she gets a front row seat to the grind of both sides. But yeah, we were just talking about it the other day and how difficult, some of those days were. And, when it was, we're working tons of hours. And then on the flip side of like watching, she's like, I watch you go do all the fun things you wanted to do. And on one hand, it was great. And I didn't really have a plan for myself to do a lot of that. And I started doing some of that, but I was also resentful of watching you do all of that and not having a plan for myself, so to speak. You don't know what to expect, I guess, when those things kinds of happen. And it was definitely, in hindsight, something that, we plan around better now, no matter what.
From that point on then, was it kind of, you didn't go back to just like, all right, I'm dropping the hobbies, I'm back to like working and did you kind of reach a point of balance at that point then? Or did you kind of tip the scales back in the other direction is I guess what I'm asking.
No, I would say I got a little bit more balance, and that kind of came with some intention and figuring that out. I knew I wasn't going to quote unquote stay retired. I was going to go back to doing some things. Like I said, I'd invested in a few franchises, so that started taking some time a little bit here and there and wanting to grow that. And then I went and worked in private equity for a little bit, with a startup private equity firm. And so that started kind of tipping the scales back a little bit. And there's been weeks. It's not like I have a perfect schedule every week. There's weeks where it's too much of one or the other. But, and we've had a few more kids and I want to invest in their upbringing and spend more time with them and the things that they love to do. But I've been able to kind of ride the roller coasters of, one and the other, and have really tried to create that balance, so to speak, that, is an optimal level of happiness and spending and everything else, as it relates to myself, my hobbies, my mental health, and everything that goes with that.
It was a learning curve. And while that period brought some challenges for him and his family, it's not one that he completely regrets.
There's a book out there called Die With Zero. I know a lot of people talk about it, but there's a concept in there that has really hit home with me. And that is that, there are certain times in your life that you can only have certain experiences. And I've really, there's a few that I've regretted. Like, I went on a church mission to Bulgaria, back when I was 19, and I had an opportunity when I was 23 to return and go have a big celebration and do a bunch of things. But I was worried at that time about, other things and saving money for other things that I didn't go on that. And I had the money. It wasn't that I didn't have the money. I did. It was not that expensive, but I had the money. I chose not to go. And that's something that I've always regretted. And so I've really tried to get a little bit more intentional about, making sure that if there's something I really want to do, that I make sure that I do it at the appropriate age that makes sense for me. Prime example, like, I always wanted it, and this is dumb now, but at the time it was amazing. And I still love this experience that I had, but I always wanted a Lexus IS 250, the 2008 model. Like, I saw those all the time in college. When I finally had enough money, I went and bought one. And I'm so glad I did, because I had 4 years of driving that thing and I absolutely loved it. The second I started having kids, car seats didn't fit in that. It just didn't make sense to keep. So I had to get rid of it. Well, guess what? I got 5 kids now. Am I ever going to be able to drive an IS 250 again? Probably around. No. Do I want to at this point in my life? No, not anymore. But I have all those memories and all those years, previously that I did. But if I would have pushed that off, to later in life, which is something I could afford, I would have missed out on those experiences. And so I've been real intentional, especially after kind of, this exit, and making sure that, I have those experiences that I really want to have at the age I have them, and trying to recreate some of those things specifically for my kids to have them at certain ages, that I think are important for them to have as well.
Coming up is his current monthly burn for a family of 5 kids under 7, by the way. But if you're still with us right now, as most of you are, because we know how you love spending so much time with us, then that means you're getting a lot of value from this conversation. Well, I've got good news for you. 2 pieces of good news for you, in fact. The first is that Hampton make this podcast for you, and we'll keep doing so because we know that it's the kind of thing you can't get anywhere else. But Hampton also makes it because it spreads the good word of our community to new founders. So yes, the second piece of good news is that there is way more value like this lifestyle stuff in the Hampton community, and also a ton of business knowledge and networking. You pick the brains of some of the greatest founders active today, seriously, and a lot of them are pretty good people to be friends with as well. And you can also do that in real life in your local group. It's true, it's not just another Zoom call once a week. These are real sessions with real people in real places. So if you're a founder doing at least 3 million ARR and you want a community of people like you, go and check it out at joinhampton.com. Because every time someone joins because they listen to this podcast, Hampton lets us keep making more. So go and check it out, joinhampton.com. All right, that's my plea to you, and it's finished. Let's get back to the show, back to listening to Jace's monthly burn. What does your kind of monthly burn look like? I'm assuming, so I've got 2 kids and they cost enough. So 5, that's a decent investment right there. So what does your kind of monthly burn as a family look like?
Yeah, so that can vary all around our travel. So when we travel and go on vacations, it goes up significantly. I think kind of our day-to-day household stuff, like we're spending about 10 a month. That's going to go up here pretty soon too. We're building a new house right now. And, mortgage, day-to-day living is pretty inexpensive. We're in Texas, so it's not too crazy, but, we'll spend 10 when we get travel months, like that can easily go to 20 to 30, depending on the month, and sometimes even more, if we go on expensive vacations that month or whatever.
Yeah, it makes sense. And what about your hobby expenses now? Like, doesn't sound like you're dropping 5 figures on basketball camps anymore, but maybe not. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, well, I plan to do a few more.
Awesome.
I had a weird injury with a torn meniscus this last year, so I didn't sign up for anything this year. Probably the biggest one, we spend quite a bit on boating. That can be $1,000 to $1,500 a month, essentially for boating. We just do kind of a boat club membership and then gas, so it's not terrible. And same thing for golf. So those 2 things with the memberships, are kind of the more expensive things from a hobby standpoint. And then the travel. The travel's, been something that, I grew up traveling a lot domestically, but didn't really go a lot internationally. I'd only kind of gone to Mexico and Canada. And that's something that my wife, she never really did a lot domestically, but went on a lot of international trips before we got married in kind of her adult years. And so we've tried to bridge those kind of 2 things together. And at this point, I think I've been to, 38 states together with her and about 20 some odd countries together. So that's something that we invest in from a hobby standpoint, and making memories and going places. We like to whitewater raft together. So, we've went whitewater rafting literally almost all over the globe. So we'll continue those kinds of, new hobbies as a family, so to speak. And, that's continue area that we'll continue to invest in and spend in.
So what advice do you have for founders, for people that have a bit of money, for people that are running businesses that are making a bit of money to, around this kind of this view of hobbies, because I think a lot of us in the business kind of world, a lot of founders, we kind of get totally absorbed in this one thing, and we're just working, and we're trying to build this thing, grow this thing, sell this thing, whatever that looks like, and maybe not spending as much time as we could do on other stuff. And like, I think one of those the most common deathbed regret is like, I wish I'd spent more time with my kids. I wish I'd spent more time doing the things that I loved, all those kinds of things. Like, I don't know. I wonder what advice do you have to help me justify buying a $3,000 synthesizer to my wife next week?
That's a great question. No, I think, personally, I think having balance in life and understanding that there are different seasons for things is really important. You talk about these things that, are important to you, and, how many of us really go spend the time to allocate our time and our money and our resources around those things that we say are the most important to us? I don't know. I mean, it's a question I ask myself frequently of like, am I in balance with the things I say are most important to myself? And am I spending and allocating my financial resources, not just my time, but my financial resources as well around those things? That's one area in particular where I'm like, yeah, vacations are important. I used to stay at like, I used to try to do vacations as cheap as possible. I'm like, I just want to get on vacation and experience. I've taken a different mindset of like, it is okay sometimes to enhance the experience, and spend a little bit, because you don't go on vacation every day, and so spending a little bit extra for, a meal here, a meal there, or, doing some things that may take, the stressful burden. Like some people don't like to do their yard, for example. I do. It's one thing that ironically, I don't outsource. I really enjoy doing those things around my yard, mowing. And some of my friends think it's crazy. Like, why would you just not hire that out? But the reality is I really enjoy it. I enjoy being outside. I enjoy I had a lawn care company, for crying out loud, back in the day. And for whatever reason, I've just always enjoyed standing behind a mower and pushing it around my yard. I just do. And just getting a self-awareness around the things that are important to you, and then building your life, your schedule, your resources around those things that are most important to you. And I feel like, when you do that, you definitely have a more full life. If you want to grind for 5 years and kind of do the 20 and 5 or whatever, 10 and 5, and have got a plan, down the road of kind of relieving some of that, great. I mean, I kind of lived that. I get it. But if you're chasing something for too long, and getting out of balance, you can get to a point where you do miss out on those opportunities and experiences that maybe you only could have at certain ages. And I don't want to see anybody, whether you're close to me or not, miss out on things because it was like, well, I've spent too much time doing this, or, I got my priorities mixed up here. And I just thought 2-3 years of this, I'd be fine. But man, I gave up all this to do it. And, here I am, and now I missed out. I mean, you just never know with health too. My mom's had cancer twice. Luckily, she's still here with us. But, seeing those kinds of things that close to me, you just never know how much time you really have to plan or push things out.
Mm-hmm. Totally. By the way, are there any things left on the bucket list?
Everything, dude. The bucket list just keeps growing. No, I've never been to Alaska. I'd love to go fishing up in Alaska. I've got that. I started, crazy enough, I started planning out vacations, for the next 15 years. I know it sounds absolutely wild, but the reality is I just don't have to spend a lot of time thinking. I kind of created this list. My wife and I sat down, and there's a few things that change here and there, but we're able to schedule things so far in advance, plan it so far in advance. I set up a lot of AI tools to kind of find the flights and all this stuff when the time comes, and plan it all around. Hey, this is where we're going this next year. Put it all together for me real quick. And I don't have to think about hey, where should we go for spring break next year? Where should we go do this? And we still have a little bit of wiggle room for some spontaneity. But, I've never been to the Olympics live. My sister competed in the Paralympics last year, so I went to Paris for that for her. She's trying to make the team for 2028. So in LA, I plan to go to the Olympics and the Paralympics in 2028. I've never been to Antarctica. I'd love to go there. I've never been to the continent of Africa. So I've got a bunch of those kinds of things. There's several golf courses that I still want to play. I haven't been to the Super Bowl yet. And then honestly, we've started kind of redoing some of these things with I want my kids to have certain things, and going back to like one of the things I find a lot of joy in is taking them places and doing things that mean a lot to me and watching them experience it. So I've got a handful of those things that now that my oldest is 7, that I'm starting to kind of put back on the bucket list of like, I've already done this, but I want to go give this experience to them and show them and watch them, and see it through their eyes. So I've got a bunch of those that are, ever growing. There's still, I really like magic, which may sound odd to people, but there's still, I've seen David Copperfield, I've seen a few of the big names, but there's still a couple like underground magicians, that I haven't seen yet. So I've got those on the bucket list. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean,
that's amazing, man. I love it.
It's ever growing.
This guy never runs out of energy and excitement. I love it so much. It's what made him such a good founder in the first place. So if you love this show, by the way, and you're a founder doing at least 3 million in ARR, and you want more discussions like this and even more business advice from people like you, go and check out joinhampton.com. If you do, and you join, not only do you get access to the greatest founder community out there, but you also guarantee this show keeps existing. So please, if you're a legit founder, go and check out joinhampton.com. Also, if you want a show like this to exist, but for your brand, check out my company. It's lowerstreet.co. We make awesome podcasts like this. We make it very easy for you to go and check it out. And for now, YouTube thinks you'll like this episode next based on your watch history. I think you'll like it too, so click it and enjoy right now. Okay, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.